This dance is getting a little bit awkward, folks. And then the Leclerc buzz isn't helping. And neither is Toto Wolff's sudden clarity about Kimi Antonelli. Seriously, for George, it's a hungry world. What should be a straightforward story has basically turned into chaos, because on the surface, Mercedes is looking calm, but beneath the waterline, it's frantic paddling. Like a duck, going around in circles with no meaningful direction whatsoever, Toto busy quacking away. And the latest twist centres around Kimi Antonelli, with him saying to the Italian press, don't worry, Kimi is going to be put in the car next year, 100%. This is probably one of the clearest assertions that he's ever had, since he used the word underwhelming when describing Antonelli 4 times in the same breath. But nevertheless, it was still just a verbal contract. Nothing in writing as of yet. You could maybe say this was the low-key announcement. Wolff's hinted back at Zandvoort that there wouldn't be fireworks, maybe even a soft launch of the idea. But either way, it does leave Russell in a stickier spot. And remember, Mercedes have invested years into Antonelli through their junior program, the same system that once pushed Russell up the ladder. You see what I did there? But for Toto, this is really important that Kimi actually kicks on and they simply cannot give up on him, because if Kimi Antonelli can improve, it does categorically prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that the MJT actually works. The system works. And whilst I think the Italian audience will appreciate this announcement because it's said amongst their own ranks in those circles, even though Kimi did cause controversy in Zandvoort by taking out Il Predestinato, the future of Kimi is something of interest to the Italian world, whose F1 press can get exceedingly emotive. But to the outside world, to us hard-nosed, cynical Brits, this is still not a contract. And no, I don't think they want to do it tidily if they wrap up second place in the Constructors, because Toto has said many times that if you don't win, then what does second, third, fourth matter? Because, well, Mercedes, if they do finish second, will have been in every single result or finishing place other than first during this regulation cycle. I don't know when an actual release is going to be confirmed, but I think it is becoming a little bit more crystal clear that Mercedes do want to keep Kimi Antonelli on board, and that maybe any contract with him is going to be a lot more clear-cut than it is with Russell at the moment, because it's just looking really, really precarious, and actually, it's becoming very much of a stalemate. So all of this could be just the start of a guided rollout for the Italian. You could maybe argue that the slow-rolling Antonelli train is down to the idea of maybe wanting to keep things fair between the two of them, to not make it seem like they are preferring one driver over the other one, and considering how sensitive George Russell is at the moment in the wake of the Verstappen talks ultimately collapsing, the last thing they want to do is annoy George even more. You don't want him spitting feathers. The biggest example I remember is when Charles Leclerc's bumper contract in 2019 through 24 was announced, and the idea of Sebastian Vettel getting another contract extension failed to get a look in. It was radio silence in that regard, until we got the news that he was going to be dropped from the Scuderia entirely. And that kind of thing could easily rattle a very established driver if the rookie that came in to work with you get his deal across the line within just a few races. Perhaps Toto remembers that saga all too well and doesn't want to repeat that here now he holds all the cards in the wake of the post-Hamilton era. Wolff gets to control a lot more than we have seen in recent times. Does he want to give up that authority, or does he want to stamp it down on his Mercedes juniors? So maybe the best thing in his mind to get a good return is to make sure that maybe both are squared away before they pull the trigger? But okay, you probably want to know about the recent updates that have come out. Well, on the Japanese website Autosport Web, there has been a little bit of a clearing up as to where Mercedes is right now. The rally between Mercedes and George Russell has gone down from the latter desiring a simple 3-year deal, or 2+1, take your pick, to a short-term standoff with some rather notable conditions. Because as you will remember, George Russell faced the very real danger of losing his seat to Max Verstappen no matter what he was able to do in the W16. Getting multiple podiums? Pfft, that was nothing. Winning in Canada? Pfft, whatevs. George wanting to be evaluated on a performance perspective and pulling out all the stops to convince us all, going, "Hey, Toto, he's actually really good. He is the best of the rest. Surely you want to keep him around for a little bit longer. Him being a team leader after 3 years of working with Lewis, this is actually looking pretty good. Yeah, more of this, please." But now all of that has gone dormant, and Max seems to be quite happy in remaining with Red Bull, his stomping ground. It's all looking really good on a technical level. They are listening to him. He is happy. He is on a turn of form. Norris himself is saying that Red Bull is now on another level, and you could interpret that he's already giving up the fight, although I personally think he's being realistic on the matter. And I think it is quite safe to say that Wolff used all of that, Max hanging around in the background, as leverage regarding Russell. Which George himself confirmed to us all that that was happening, and all of this has basically caused confusion and delay. And oh yeah, Mercedes are really pushing for a 1-year deal. I don't think a 1+1 sort of thing, no, just a straight up 1-year extension. So essentially, George is getting the Bottas treatment, and not the £30 million a year. Not even maybe equaling Lando's £20 million a year. No. Maybe something barely above what he currently gets, George, of $15 million a year. But in the midst of all of this stuff from Autosport Web, George is coming around to the idea of maybe going for a shorter deal, but with a rather interesting condition that hasn't been talked about yet. If he outscores Antonelli by probably a set margin, Mercedes should then extend him beyond 2027. Because Toto views Kimi Antonelli as the future of Mercedes, the successor to George Russell. And if Russell can still beat Kimi Antonelli going into his second season, like how Piastri was able to kick on against Norris in his second season last season, then George should rightly feel like he deserves another go-around. This doesn't sound wholly unreasonable, does it? It would simply mean that a clause would be triggered, and therefore George would be secure in 2027. And since Mercedes aren't going to be getting rid of Kimi, that he is staying, according to Toto 100%, it means that Mercedes have to take their hands off the driver market and just stick with what they've got. MJT drivers. And that means, potentially in this sense, Russell has Toto over a barrel, and I don't think the Austrian likes that. Beyond raw pace, Russell's PR polish and calm media handling also make him an asset in ways Antonelli still has to work on. He is doing ads, Kimi, but he isn't quite as slick as George. Seriously, I can't really see Kimi hawking gardening products the way that George can. And even though there has been talk about Russell bringing down some of these media days and these sponsorship commitments, the days in which he does work for sponsors, I personally think that partners are really pleased with the level of commitment that George provides. He is a very slick talker, like how Jenson Button is a slick pundit. I can easily see George becoming a pundit once he hangs up his helmet. I would want to see that, actually. Although when you put him next to Max Verstappen, it might actually bring up the comments that I've seen many times on this channel, that George is one of these. Nevertheless though, George's stance at the moment is very, very confident. And I don't think it's a stance that Toto really is comfortable with, and it's not something he really has experience with other his times with Lewis, but then times were absolutely gravy, so it made the whole talk with Hamilton much clearer, much more simple, because Lewis was winning titles and he would like to stay with the team and win more titles. George has been promised titles, but he has yet to receive them, so you can understand why George is getting a little bit antsy in the pantsy. So maybe what Toto's doing right now is just stonewalling George and hoping to wait out the clock, then maybe Russell will be pressured into a deal. Well, so far, that's not working. At least not entirely. Because I think Wolff's stance would be that there are no conditions to be had, just a simple 1-year deal. And I think Russell sees the writing on the wall that maybe the push with Antonelli and the risk of Verstappen maybe coming in for 2027 if Red Bull really drop the ball, it could box him out. That's why there are also reports considering independent management, free from Mercedes' influence, since even though he does have the likes of Harry Soden there with him, he is ultimately underneath the Mercedes umbrella. And I don't think you need me to tell you that come the middle of 2026, that silly season is going to explode. We thought we had it big in the last couple of years. No, I think next year is going to be a powder keg. And I don't think George wants to be caught in the middle of that and the one having to face the music in being out of Formula 1 entirely, or at a backmarker team just having to wait out the clock until a better deal comes around, or he fades away into obscurity, like many people thought Carlos Sainz would be fading into obscurity, and look where Williams is right now. And here's the other thing that I have mentioned a couple of times before, but could make Mercedes fans, the ones who've remained after Lewis, choke on their coffee. We're in October right now, as of this video, and we still have absolutely nothing in terms of things in writing. There is a growing chance that Russell could actually walk, even though his heart is still with Mercedes. He's only 27, he's already proven himself against Hamilton, and would be instantly attracted to any team with ambitions for 2027 and beyond. if they got wind that Russell was losing the faith, especially if Fernando Alonso stays after 2026, if he feels like there's still more gas in the tank in bringing Aston Martin to the top, and it might mean that Lance Stroll might have an excuse to leave the sport if he's weary of it. If George ever went to Aston, it wouldn't be next to Lance, since you've only got to look at their junior histories together. They don't exactly get along, George arguably being denied by Stroll on multiple occasions. Or maybe Red Bull could be a little bit cheeky and make the most of Mercedes' turmoil, after years of Toto and now Zach needling at them. Oh, this would be the ultimate ironic revenge. Yes, this might sound a little bit fanciful when you actually say it out loud, but these are the kind of opportunities that could arise with these one-year deals knocking around. And seriously, for Mercedes to gamble all of this with a race-winning British driver who has aspirations for the championship and has actually been really good at leading the team and holding his own against a 7-time world champion, to do that would be insane. It's a really awkward bind Wolff has created. Russell and Antonelli are Mercedes drivers through and through. They understand the system, and fans get that. Yeah, Mercedes aren't as popular after Hamilton left, and Bottas's behind-the-scenes roles will be missed when he heads off to Cadillac. By the way, have you heard that Toto is supposedly blocking Bottas from doing any private testing with Cadillac until the end of the year, as per his contract? Spoil sport. I suppose it just gives Checo more opportunities to gain attention. Okay, it's not so bad for Checo. But I think the biggest thing of the tale is something I alluded to in my previous video on this topic. That Helmut Marko said that he can't really see anyone else other than George leading Mercedes at the moment, that they have no better option than the one they've already got, so why would you get rid of him? Oh, that was such a burn. Such a major burn. And a unifying burn, because many of the comments, be it on here and on other social platforms, how are just having George fans and anti-Red Bull people just gritting their teeth and going, oh, the helmet had a point there. Hang on, Lord, that report says he's okay, George going down from 3 years to 1? Why? What would be the real benefit of doing that? The market gives him little room at the moment for next year, that's a given, so having no deal at all would be a disaster for Russell. Sure, drivers can come back from a sabbatical, but many drivers don't. Right now, almost every top seat is locked in until next year or later. For Russell, missing one cycle could mean missing the only realistic ladder rung for years. And what makes this really, really silly, both on Toto and George's side, is that right now there are no better options. Mercedes are really lucky to have George, and George is really lucky to have Mercedes at the moment. So just come to some sort of an agreement, which Russell seems to be coming toward, but is now having these other little sticking points like a performance clause, and then maybe things might become a little clearer come 2027 perhaps. No, I'm not saying that Max is going to Mercedes. That is far too early to say, and given what freedoms Max is having and him doing the 24 hours of Nürburgring potentially, it may never come Mercedes' way, because I can't imagine Mercedes being that flexible, the way Red Bull are right now. But maybe this is a come down from Russell and goes with what Wolff has been saying recently, that anyone seeking a long-term deal is not in the Mercedes mindset. So perhaps maybe if George goes with this one-year deal and maybe hopes for another one with that performance clause, it might buy him some time to find some brand new management. Then he can go into 2027 all guns blazing perhaps. Because I think come the middle of the season, many questions will be answered as to where all of the teams lie in terms of the pecking order. Not all the answers, mind you. Because remember, engine development is a thing again, or at least will be come Melbourne, that there is no engine freeze, that teams who start off the season well may not be so hot come the end of the year, but it gives you a clearer picture about where the trajectory may be for particular teams that George might have an interest in, or whether or not it's worth remaining at the team he's already at. Especially given the recent rumblings from articles from Automotor and Sport suggesting that maybe Mercedes' power unit is having teething troubles. Despite them having multiple customers to iron out the bugs faster, Russell may wish to have an avenue of inquiry which may mean he can be free to test the market. He backs himself against Kimi too, and if he soundly outperforms him again next year, his stock will remain strong, and that performance story might now, on reflection, be easier to cash in on if he's not tied down for multiple seasons. And hey, if money is the apple of George's eye and he is seeking $30 million a year, maybe Mercedes would be more inclined to offer him that nugget if he is only around for 1 year. Equally, should Automotor and Sport's assertions that maybe Mercedes doesn't have the hottest ticket when it comes to power units, George might just want to test the waters himself and see if Mercedes ultimately make the best car, because James Allison said himself that it is not going to be an engine formula next year. You have to get everything right. And let's not forget my piece not that long ago about Pirelli's findings of 2026, that the tyres themselves and the way that the downforce works with them could be very important next year too. Not just the grunt. It makes the whole thing around Mercedes not look nearly as simple as it was a couple of years ago, where we all thought, oh, that's it, Mercedes are just going to cakewalk this. Maybe not, because Mercedes have to remember that they made a promise to George around 2022 when he got the call up that he would be in a position to be winning championships, helping out the team to win another constructors title. In fact, when you stop to think about it, he's in a similar position to what Charles Leclerc is over at Ferrari. He was promised greatness, he came sort of close in the first half of 2022, but no cigar. We've not really had the whole widget that was afforded them when they were youngsters coming into those teams for the first season. And maybe with a one-year deal, if the Mercedes car, the W17, turns out to be an absolute rocket ship, then Russell could be in the position to win the World Championship, or come the negotiations, he might have already secured the championship, and that would make it an easy win. You would keep him. You would definitely keep him, no matter how much he was asking, because you'd have the best driver on the grid who won the title. The issue is that I think it's become a standoff where Toto or George have no clue what to do next. Kimi is willing, though, to go with whatever plan Toto has for him, and thusly, it seems like maybe a contract has been thrashed out more easily with him behind the scenes, probably awaiting his big brother to comply with a deal, an unconditional deal, so it was seen. Toto basically saying to George, you're going to take this one-year deal and you're going to like it. Is that the right thing to do, though? Well, it's kind of hard to say. Who is in the wrong here? Toto for being too stubborn with a proven talent, or George for simply being too greedy and being too pernickety? And despite the fact they are both Mercedes coded, I think their individual human natures are getting in the way of all of this. And that is before the other matter of maybe other parties that aren't named Max Verstappen wanting to get into bed with that team, if they make a really good car. Max is a pretty big fish, but other people could flaunt their own ideas, especially with Russell being protected by a meager one-year deal, making him not that safe. If someone like Charles Leclerc comes into play for 2027, as I talked about in my predictions video, and even though he refuted it, Charles, he said he would do it when he stopped believing, so I'm not entirely convinced that those rumours aren't exactly baseless, it does add more pressure on Russell's side if there are two elite forces challenging his seat. George, I think, is amongst the elites, the top of what Formula One has to offer right now, but Mercedes know everything that George is capable of. Toto said himself, they don't think about performance because they have everything they need to know on Russell after years of data streams. Charles Leclerc, though, even though on paper he is an equal, he is a relative unknown, and I think a fascination with the likes of Wolff. And Max's manager Raymond Vermeulen himself actually name-dropped Charles Leclerc in regards to people that Toto would potentially speak to. In fact, the RMC Motori rumours were actually saying that Toto was talking to Charles's team about a possible move to Mercedes, should Leclerc end up with a Ferrari that cannot, yet again, give him a title fight. And even though Toto has gone into a little bit more detail that he has had regular conversations with Max, especially those of the personal level, it is still a bit of a tell that Mercedes is willing to keep the board open if there are more chess pieces that come into view. But I think the main story here is that Wolff really wants total control of this team once more. In fact, arguably, he never really had full control, especially during the Hamilton era. After years of Lewis having absolute domination of that team, being the top banana of Mercedes AMG, I think Wolff would like to have some time where he gets to wield the most influence, and that the drivers don't ultimately take him for a fool. With Lewis gone, this is a chance for him to reassert total authority. For Kimi, oh, that's no problem. He'll do anything that Toto says. Toto views him like a son within the Formula One paddock, and Kimi sees Toto as a father figure. George might have seen Toto like that, but he is no child no more. I still remember that video from the Mercedes social media feed where George is asking for advice and Toto responds, George, you're 27, you know exactly what you need to do. Well, yeah, George knows exactly what he needs to do in this particular situation, and Toto, I don't think he's liking this resistance. From Wolff's point of view, no other driver within the Mercedes fold should ever get to hold the keys to the kingdom ever again. Is that fair, though? Well, it depends which side of the negotiating table you find yourselves on. From Mercedes' side, pressing for a short deal is tough, but rational. From Russell's side, pushing for money or performance protection is equally rational. None of that makes Antonelli a proper pawn though. His presence has changed the maths though, which is different from being used as a manipulating figure, because Kimi is a factor within the negotiations on George's side that if Russell can beat Antonelli by X amount, then Y should then occur by default. And I can sort of understand why Toto would be resistant to that particular clause, because it would be a marker to think that, oh, maybe Kimi would underperform in his second season by a certain amount, and therefore George should be rewarded for Kimi not performing. And that sounds kind of weird. And then on top of that, Mercedes would look really foolish for Kimi being behind Russell by a certain amount, and that they would be just saying, oh, you shouldn't have brought him up, you brought him up too early. And then the pendulum would definitely swing back to Russell, because he would have beaten the child prodigy of Mercedes as well as the Mercedes god. I don't think George has any beef with Kimi. He views him as a great sidekick, and whilst George remains at Mercedes, he would like Kimi to remain just that. Yeah, this should really have been such a simple discussion. It should have been back what it was at the beginning of the season when Toto said he was super happy with those two and that they would be on the cards for 2026, and then we got some sort of announcement around Silverstone, and even then that would have been a little bit late. But no, right now, it's anything but simple. The fact we're still talking about it makes everyone there look smaller than they actually are. And there are fresh costs to dragging this out too. Next year's car and power unit, they need stable feedback loops. And with two drivers who aren't entirely sure they'll be around next year to develop the W17, they aren't firing all cylinders in that regard, especially in the simulator. So if they can actually just get it down on paper, in writing, that their respective managements and parties and posses are happy with, then I think they could all go in full speed for the W17 to make sure it definitely fulfills to the hype that has been surrounding them the last few years. And I think the simulator team will really appreciate this especially, as well as the sponsors and partners of Mercedes, because this is around the time of year that they're gearing up for their 2026 campaigns, and they would like to be knowing whether or not Kimi and George will actually be there before they go out for their photo shoots. Because I remember a shot from a Red Bull video where they photoshopped Alex Albon on top of Pierre Gasly because they made that mid-season swap. And all of this is just completely undermining the reputation that Mercedes established for themselves during their dominant year, and they would like to try and rebuild after a few years of in the wilderness. But right now, that stoicism that they are seeking, no, it's just looking completely muddled. And let's be real, sponsors would really like to see George Russell hawking their product. Kimi Antonelli, maybe in a few years if he kicks on, but right now, he's not nearly as much of a commodity as George is. I mean, that could change if Kimi has an absolutely fantastic end to this season and then goes into next season looking equally compelling, but right now, from a commercial point of view, George looks like the better bet. And don't worry, I'm not being one-sided here. This is all hurting George's prospects too. The longer this drags out, the more doubt there will be regarding its actual value and whether teams will be willing to stump it up. So, Mercedes, please end this. Confirm Antonelli, sign Russell on fair terms for both parties, and then get back to building next year's car at full bore. Because nobody's waiting within Formula One, and waiting is the biggest tax any team can pay out. But I think the decision to stick around and watch this particular video is not a taxing decision at all. So I'll go and see you over there once I change the top.